black Mercedes S-Class cut through the chaos of Lagos traffic like a knife through water, its tinted windows reflecting the faces of street vendors, Okada riders, and the countless souls who made their living in the dust and noise of Ikeja. Behind the wheel sat Adewale Mensah, 42 years old, his tailored Brioni suit worth more than most families earned in a year, his wrist adorned with a Patek Philippe that could feed a village for months. He was scrolling through his phone, barely noticing the world outside, when a small figure darted between the cars. A child no more than 12, dragging a massive sack of plastic bottles behind her like a prisoner hauling chains. The driver slammed the brakes. The Mercedes screamed to a halt. Adewale's head snapped up, his heart hammering, and through the windshield he saw her. A little girl in a faded pink dress, her feet bare and dusty, her eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't the terror that froze him. It was her face. Those eyes, that jawline. Something ancient and terrible stirred in his chest, a ghost he'd spent 12 years burying beneath marble floors and champagne toasts. The driver cursed and opened his door to shout, but Adewale raised a hand to stop him. He stepped out himself, his Italian leather shoes touching the hot asphalt, and the girl looked up at him. For a moment, the entire city seemed to hold its breath. She whispered an apology, grabbed her sack, and disappeared into the crowd before he could speak. Adewale stood there for what felt like an eternity, the horns blaring around him, his hands trembling. That night, in his golden mansion, with its infinity pool and imported chandeliers, he couldn't sleep. His wife Nadia lay beside him, her face covered in a silk mask, her breathing cold and rhythmic. And all Adewale could see when he closed his eyes was that little girl's face, and another face, younger, softer, from a lifetime ago. Efua, the woman he'd loved, the woman he'd destroyed. 12 years earlier, Adewale had been a different man. Not poor, but not rich either. Just a young entrepreneur with big dreams and empty pockets, hustling between meetings, sleeping on friends' couches, believing that one day his brilliance would be recognized. And Efua had believed in him too. She was a university student then, studying literature, with a smile that could make the stars jealous and a laugh that sounded like rain on a tin roof. They'd met at a buka near campus, both reaching for the last bottle of Fanta, and from that moment they were inseparable. She would read him poetry while he sketched business plans on napkins. She would hold him when investors rejected him, whispering that his time was coming. And when she told him she was pregnant, he'd held her face in his hands and promised her the world. But promises, Adewale learned, are easy to make and easier to break. 3 months into her pregnancy, opportunity knocked, not gently, but with the force of destiny itself. Chief Okonkwo, one of Lagos's wealthiest men, offered him a deal: marry his daughter Nadia, merge their businesses, and become a millionaire overnight. The chief made it clear. This was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. Take the deal, or watch someone else take your dreams. Adewale remembered the night he told Efua. She was sitting on her small bed in her dormitory, her hand on her barely visible belly. And when he said the words, "I have to go, I have to take this chance," she didn't scream or cry. She just looked at him with those eyes, those same eyes he'd seen in the little girl's face today, and said quietly, "So, you're choosing money over us." He'd tried to explain, tried to justify, tried to give her money she refused to take. But in the end, he'd walked away. He'd married Nadia in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. He'd built his empire. And he'd told himself every single day for 12 years that he'd made the right choice. But now, sitting in his mansion, Adewale knew he'd been lying to himself. The next morning, he did something he couldn't explain. He ordered his driver to take him back to Ikeja, back to the exact spot where he'd almost hit the girl. And there, in the gray light of dawn, he found her. She was already working, moving between parked cars with a stick, spearing plastic bottles and cans, dropping them into her sack with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Adewale watched from inside the car, his throat tight. She was so small. Her arms were thin as reeds, her dress was torn at the hem. But she moved with dignity, her head held high. When she'd collected enough, she sat under a tree and counted her coins, dirty naira notes, and small change that amounted to maybe 300 naira total. And then she smiled. Not a big smile, not a hopeful smile, just a small, private smile, as if she was dreaming of something beautiful only she could see. Adewale found himself getting out of the car and walking toward her before his mind could catch up with his feet. She looked up, startled, recognizing him immediately. She scrambled to her feet, ready to run, but he raised both hands in peace. "Wait," he said, his voice softer than he'd used in years. "I'm not angry. I wanted to make sure you were okay." The girl studied him, with eyes far older than her years, eyes that had seen too much. "I'm fine, sir," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't see your car." "What's your name?" Adewale asked. "Ama," she said. "Ama Ajay." Ajay Ifua's surname. The world tilted slightly beneath his feet. Adewale cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice normal. Do you do this every day? Collect bottles?" Ama nodded. "Yes, sir. Every day except Sunday. My mother is sick. The medicine is expensive." She said it simply, without self-pity, as if it were just a fact of life. The sky is blue, water is wet, mothers get sick and daughters collect trash. Adewale felt something crack inside his chest. He pulled out his wallet and offered her a stack of 1,000 naira notes, but Ama stepped back, shaking her head. "I can't take that, sir." "Why not?" "Because I didn't work for it. My mother taught me, dignity is the only wealth the poor can keep. If I take money I didn't earn, I lose even that." Adewale stared at this 12-year-old child who just taught him a lesson he'd forgotten decades ago. He found himself smiling, despite the pain in his chest. "What if I gave you work then? Real work. I own a company, Mensa Industries. Come clean the offices for a week. I'll pay you 50,000 naira." Ama's eyes went wide. 50,000 naira was more money than she'd seen in her entire life. She looked at him suspiciously, the way someone who'd been disappointed too many times looks at hope. "Why would you do that?" "Because," Adewale said, and he didn't know if he was lying or telling the truth. "Everyone deserves a chance." Ama thought about it for a long moment, then nodded once. "Okay, but I work hard. I'm not taking charity." "I believe you," Adewale said. And he did. That evening, Ama returned to the one-room shack she shared with her mother in the heart of Ajagunle, one of Lagos's most notorious slums. The room was barely 10 feet by 10 feet, with a tin roof that leaked when it rained, and walls so thin you could hear every conversation in the neighboring rooms. But it was home. And in the corner, on a thin mattress on the floor, lay Efua. She was only 38, but illness had aged her, carved her down to bone and shadow. Her eyes, though, her eyes were still beautiful, still full of the intelligence and warmth that had captivated Adewale so many years ago. "Mama," Ama said, kneeling beside her, "I got a job. A real job. A rich man is going to pay me to clean his offices." Efua tried to smile, but it turned into a cough that shook her whole body. When she pulled the cloth away from her mouth, there were flecks of blood on it. She hid it quickly before Amma could see, but Amma saw everything. Amma always saw. "That's wonderful, my love," Efua whispered, "but you must be careful. Rich men, they don't give without expecting something in return." "This one seems different," Amma said, though she wasn't sure why she believed it. Something about the way the man had looked at her, like he was seeing a ghost, like he was haunted. Efua closed her eyes, and Amma thought she'd fallen asleep. But then she spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Amma, there's something I need to tell you. About your father." Amma went very still. Her father was a subject they never discussed, a locked door Efua had always refused to open. "What about him?" Amma asked. But Efua's breathing had changed, become labored and wet. Her body convulsed with another coughing fit, this one worse than before, and when Amma pulled her mother's hand away from her mouth, it was covered in blood, bright red blood, too much blood. Amma screamed. The next morning, Amma showed up at Mensa Industries at 5 a.m., before the sun had fully risen, before the security guards had finished their tea. She was let in reluctantly, given a bucket and mop, and pointed toward the first floor. The building was a monument to wealth. Polished marble floors, glass walls, leather furniture that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood. Amma had never seen anything like it. But she didn't gawk. She didn't touch anything she wasn't supposed to touch. She simply worked, the way she'd worked her entire life, with quiet determination and invisible pride. Adewale arrived at 8, and from his office on the 10th floor, he watched her on the security cameras. She was on the 3rd floor now, mopping in small, careful circles, making sure every inch was perfect. Other employees started to arrive, and Adewale saw how they looked at her. The wrinkled noses, the whispered comments, the way they stepped around her, as if poverty were contagious. It made him angry in a way he hadn't felt in years. By midday, word had reached Nadia. His wife arrived unannounced, sweeping into his office in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely contained rage. She was beautiful in the way a diamond is beautiful, cold, hard, brilliant, and utterly without warmth. "What?" she said, her voice like ice cracking. "Is that creature doing in our building?" "Her name is Amma," Adewale said, not looking up from his computer. "And she's working." "Working?" "She looks like she crawled out of a gutter. The clients are complaining. The staff is complaining. I'm complaining. Fire her." "No." Nadia blinked, genuinely shocked. In 12 years of marriage, Adewale had never said no to her. Not once. "Excuse me?" "I said no." "She stays." Nadia's face transformed, rage and suspicion warring for dominance. "Why? Why do you care about some street rat?" Adewale finally looked at her, and for the first time in their marriage, he let her see what he really thought of her. "Because unlike you, Nadia, she knows what it means to work for something. She knows what it means to love someone more than herself. She's 12 years old, and she has more dignity in her little finger than you've had in your entire life." The words hung in the air like gunshots. Nadia's face went white, then red. She leaned across his desk, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I will find out what this is really about. And when I do, you'll regret this." She turned and left, her heels clicking like nails on a coffin. Nadia kept her promise. That afternoon, she had her driver follow Amma home, and when she saw where the girl lived, the crumbling buildings, the open sewers, the poverty that seemed to seep from the very earth, she smiled. This was leverage. This was ammunition. She took photos with her phone, already composing the social media posts in her head. "My husband, the great Adewale of Mensa." bringing slum children into our offices. Is this the kind of man you want running your companies? But something stopped her from posting them immediately. Some instinct told her there was more to this story, something bigger. So she waited and watched. Meanwhile, Afwa's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The free clinic in Ajagunle had referred her to St. Catherine's Hospital, but the doctors there had been blunt. She needed surgery. Her heart was failing, weakened by years of untreated rheumatic fever, made worse by malnutrition and stress. Without the operation, she had weeks at most. With it, she might have years. The cost? 500,000 naira. It might as well have been 5 million. 50 million. It was impossible. The neighbors tried to help. A woman brought soup. A man offered to pray. Another started a small collection that raised 12,000 naira. It was kind. It was generous. It was nowhere near enough. Amma did the math in her head. At her current rate, working both the cleaning job and collecting trash in the evenings, she could save maybe 70,000 in a month. By the time she had enough, her mother would be dead. So Amma did what she'd always done. She prayed, not to a distant God in heaven, but to the God she believed lived in small moments of kindness, in the hands of strangers, in the impossible becoming possible. And then she went back to work. On the 5th day of her employment, Adewale called Amma up to his office. She came reluctantly, her eyes downcast, expecting to be fired. Instead, he offered her a chair, a gesture so simple it almost made her cry because no one, not one person in that building, had offered her a place to sit. "How is your mother?" Adewale asked. Amma's hands clenched in her lap. "She's dying, sir." The words came out flat, factual. She'd run out of tears days ago. Adewale felt the room tilt. What's wrong with her? Her heart. The doctors say she needs surgery. 500,000 naira. She looked up at him then, and he saw the desperation she'd been hiding. "I'm saving, sir. I'm working hard. I just need more time." Adewale's throat felt like it was full of broken glass. He wanted to ask the question that had been burning in his mind for days, but he was afraid, terrified. What if he was wrong? What if this was just coincidence, just his guilt, making him see ghosts in the face of every poor child? But he had to know. "Amma," he said carefully. "What's your mother's name?" "Efua, sir." The world stopped. No, everything stopped. The traffic outside, the hum of the air conditioning, his heartbeat, his breath, everything. "Efua what?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Efua Ajay." Adewale stood up so fast, his chair fell backward. Amma jumped, confused, frightened. He grabbed his keys, his phone, already moving toward the door. "Where does she live? Tell me right now." Amma rattled off the address, and Adewale was running, actually running through the office, past his shocked secretary, into the elevator, through the lobby. Amma ran after him, not understanding, her heart pounding. They got into his car, and he drove like a madman through Lagos traffic, breaking every law, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. "Sir, what's happening?" Amma asked. "Is my mother in trouble?" Adewale couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. After 12 years of running, destiny had finally caught him. They reached Ajagunle in record time, the Mercedes completely out of place in the narrow, muddy streets. Adewale didn't care. He followed Amma up 3 flights of crumbling stairs, down a dark hallway that smelled of cooking oil and mildew, to a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Amma pushed it open, and there, on a thin mattress on the floor, lay Efua. She'd aged. Pain had carved lines into her face, and poverty had stolen her flesh. But she was still Efua. Still the woman he'd loved. Still the woman he'd destroyed. Their eyes met across the small room. 12 years of silence. 12 years of lies. 12 years of a life he'd stolen from her. From himself. From their child. "You came," Efua whispered, and she started to cry. Adewale crossed the room in 3 steps and fell to his knees beside her. His expensive suit touching the dirty floor, his hands reaching for hers, his face crumbling like a building in an earthquake. "Is she mine?" he asked, though he already knew. He'd always known. "Yes," Efua said. "She's yours." Adewale turned to look at Amma, who stood in the doorway, her face frozen in shock and confusion. This 12-year-old girl who'd been collecting trash in the streets. This child who'd almost been killed by his car. This daughter he'd never known, never held, never loved. His daughter. And the weight of what he'd done, what he'd stolen from all of them, crashed over him like a wave. And Adewale Mensah, billionaire, philanthropist, respected businessman, put his face in his hands and wept like a child. The next hours passed in a blur. Adewale called his personal doctor, had Efua transferred to the best private hospital in Lagos, paid for the surgery up front in cash. He stayed with them through it all. The ambulance ride, the admission process, the terrifying wait while surgeons worked to repair Efua's failing heart. Amma sat beside him in the waiting room, silent and shell-shocked, and Adewale couldn't find the words to explain. How do you explain to a child that you're the father who abandoned her, that you chose money over her life, that you've been living in luxury while she dug through garbage to survive? Finally, after the longest 6 hours of his life, a doctor emerged with good news. The surgery was successful. Efua would need time to recover, but she would live. Adewale closed his eyes and thanked to God he'd stopped believing in years ago. When they were finally allowed into Efua's room, she was pale and weak but conscious. She looked at Adewale, then at Amma, and reached out her hand. "Tell her," she whispered. "She deserves to know." So Adewale told her everything out. He told her about how he'd met Efua in university, how they'd fallen in love, how she'd gotten pregnant. He told her about Chief Okonkwo's offer, about the choice he'd made, about the 12 years he'd spent trying to forget. He told her about his empty marriage, about the guilt that haunted him, about how seeing her face in the street had shattered every lie he'd built his life on. Amma listened without speaking, tears streaming down her face. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Did you ever think about us?" "Every single day," Adewale said, his voice breaking. "Every single day of my life." Amma didn't hug him. She didn't call him father. She just sat there, a 12-year-old girl trying to process the fact that the man who'd abandoned her was also the man who'd just saved her mother's life, that the father she'd dreamed about in secret was real, was here, was crying. It was too much, too big, too complicated. So she just sat and let the tears fall and tried to figure out what she was supposed to feel. But Nadia had been busy. Through her network of society friends and hired investigators, she'd pieced the story together. And now, at the annual Lagos Elite Charity Gala, an event where the wealthy pretended to care about the poor while sipping champagne that cost more than the causes they claimed to support, she made her move. Adewale had been forced to attend, leaving Efua and Amma at the hospital. He stood in the grand ballroom of the Lagos Continental Hotel, surrounded by men in custom agbadas and women dripping in diamonds, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. Then Nadia took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "I'd like to share something with you all. My husband, Adewale Mensah, has recently reconnected with an old friend. Her smile was poison wrapped in silk. Actually, more than a friend. His former lover, and their illegitimate daughter, a street child, a trash picker. The room went silent. Every eye turned to Adewale. He felt the judgment, the shock, the delicious scandal of it all. And here's the beautiful part, Nadia continued, her voice rising. He's been spending our money, my family's money, on them, on his mistakes, his dirty little secrets, while I, his wife, remain childless and humiliated. Adewale stood very still. For 12 years he'd been afraid of this moment, afraid of exposure, of judgment, of losing everything he'd built. But now, standing here with all of Lagos high society staring at him, he realized something. He didn't care anymore. He was tired, tired of lying, tired of pretending, tired of being the man everyone expected him to be, instead of the man he actually was. So he walked up to the stage, took the microphone from Nadia's hand, and spoke the truth. Everything my wife said is correct, he began, his voice steady. 12 years ago, I was in love with a woman named Ifua. She got pregnant, and I abandoned her. I chose money over love. I chose reputation over responsibility. I chose this. He gestured around the room, over her, over our daughter, and I've regretted it every single day since. The room was absolutely silent. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Adewale continued. I'm not asking for understanding. I'm just done lying. My daughter's name is Ama. She's 12 years old. She's brilliant, brave, and stronger than anyone in this room. She spent her childhood collecting trash so her mother wouldn't die. While I was here, drinking your champagne and accepting your awards, he looked directly at Nadia. I'm done with this marriage. I'm done with this life. I'm done pretending to be something I'm not. He set the microphone down and walked off the stage, through the shocked crowd, out of the hotel, and into the Lagos night. Behind him, Nadia stood frozen, her perfect plan having backfired spectacularly. She'd wanted to destroy him. Instead, she'd set him free. The months that followed were not easy. Divorce proceedings were brutal. Nadia fought him for every naira, leaked stories to the press, tried to destroy his business reputation. Some partners left. Some contracts were canceled, but others surprisingly stayed. Because it turned out that people respected honesty more than perfection. Respected a man who admitted his mistakes more than one who pretended to be flawless. Ifua recovered slowly. Adewale bought her a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Not a mansion, not charity, just a safe, comfortable home where she could heal. Ama enrolled in a good school. She was behind in some subjects, ahead in others, and struggled with the social dynamics of children who'd never known poverty. But she was resilient. She'd always been resilient. And Adewale visited every weekend without fail. At first it was awkward. Ama called him sir and kept her distance. Ifua was kind but careful, her forgiveness real but complicated. They were three people trying to become a family, trying to build something from ruins and regret. Adewale didn't push. He just showed up. He helped Ama with homework. He sat with Ifua in the garden while she recovered her strength. He listened to their stories, learned about the life he'd missed, and tried not to drown in the knowledge of all those lost years. First words, first steps, first days of school, all the moments a father should have witnessed. One Sunday afternoon, 6 months after that first day in the street, Adewale and Ama were walking in the park near Ifua's house. They'd been talking about school, about her favorite subjects, about nothing important. And then, as they crossed a small bridge over a pond, Amma reached out and took his hand. It was a small gesture, a child's hand in an adult's hand. But to Adewale, it felt like absolution, like grace, like a door that had been locked for 12 years finally, slowly, beginning to open. He looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Some things are too big for words. The Akan people have a proverb. A tree is known by its fruit, but even a withered branch can bloom again if given rain. Adewale had planted a seed in shame and watered it with silence. He'd convinced himself that abandonment was the same as sacrifice, that walking away was a kind of love. But life has a way of bringing every seed back to the surface, of making us face what we've buried. Not always to punish us, though there is always punishment in regret, but to teach us, to show us that the love we abandon will either haunt us or heal us, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, it does both. Redemption, Adewale learned, doesn't look like he'd imagined. It's not a trophy or an award, not a single moment of forgiveness that washes everything clean. It's smaller than that. It's a girl's hand trusting yours. It's showing up every weekend, even when it's awkward. It's admitting you were wrong and accepting that "I'm sorry" doesn't erase the past. It just opens a door to a different future. Adewale would never be the father he should have been. Those years were gone, stolen by his own cowardice. But he could be the father he was capable of becoming. Imperfect, present, trying. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. That evening, as the sun set over Lagos, Adewale sat with Amma and Afua under a tree in the garden, eating roasted corn from a street vendor. It was simple. It was ordinary. It was nothing like the life he'd built in his golden mansion. And it was the most real thing he'd felt in 12 years. The corn was sweet. The evening air was cool. His daughter's laugh was the most beautiful sound in the world. And for the first time since he was a young man, with empty pockets and big dreams, sitting in a buka with a girl who loved him, Adewale Mensah felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not in a mansion, not on a stage, just here, with them. Finally, impossibly home.